The copy paste, it really doesn't work. We're all looking for an easy button. We're all looking for a blueprint.
I thought I'm a coach and I'm supposed to have this avatar of thinking and being.
And I want to follow their roadmap to get there.
Yes.
There is no perfect set of strengths for any given role. I've coached with many CEOs. They are not all high competition. The people that work from their strengths every day are 9% more productive.
I was still able to do really well as a sales closer, but I leveraged my social work skills.
The true easy button, if there was one, is focusing on doing it your way.
Hello and welcome back to the Ambitious Podcast. Today, I am really excited because you and I are going to be diving in with Rosie. Rosie is someone that I have had the absolute pleasure of being able to get to know on a deeper level and also work with from a capacity of leadership coaching and really learning how the different strengths we have as entrepreneurs impact us in our ability to lead, in our ability to execute, and frankly, in our ability to scale. So I'm joined today by Rosie Noel, who is a leadership coach and a Clifton Strengths expert who actually spent years in Fortune 500 consulting before transitioning into entrepreneurship herself. Rosie specializes in helping high achieving leaders understand their unique strengths and use them intentionally to get better results while also making sure they feel more energized in the work that they do. What makes Rosie's approach really unique is that she's kind of debunking this myth that there is this one type of avatar of entrepreneur and also that there's a right way to be a successful CEO or a successful business owner. Through the Clifton Strengths assessment, which she now calls your leadership fingerprint, she's going to help you to discover how to work from your natural talents instead of trying to copy somebody else's playbook, which I know myself, I have also tried and fallen victim to in the past. So let's overview a little bit of what you're going to learn by tuning in today. She's going to discuss why there's no perfect set of strengths for any role. She's worked with CEOs who have zero strategic thinking themes and successful salespeople who are terrible at networking, yet they've all been able to thrive in their unique areas. She also discusses the Japanese concept of Ikigai and how finding the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, and what the world needs, and what you can get paid for actually will be your reason for being. She discusses her 3 core strategy framework for getting things done, deciding if you actually need to do it, if you can outsource it to someone else who actually has that strength, or how to do it authentically using the strengths that you have. She'll also unpack why the copy paste mentality of following somebody else's business blueprint is actually the hardest path to success. The difference between being drained is also a thing that she's going to unpack for us, and why there's a huge difference between working hard versus being energized by the work that you do, and how this actually will reveal whether you're working through your Clifton strengths or not. She also will discuss the difference between being drained by hard work versus being energized by it, and how this reveals whether you're working from your Clifton strengths or if you're actually fighting against your natural wiring. This is truly an episode that I will tell you, you are going to want to take notes on. I will immediately give you the action of going and following Rosie's content and her marketing. She did this Clifton Strengths assessment on me and gave me a lot of feedback and insight around how I operate and what that looks like when I integrate that awareness and that understanding into my business and the impact it can have. It has already, since meeting her, made massive impacts on the way that I approach my business day to day. So, with all that being said, let's get into today's episode. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to Ambitious. Today, we are joined by the incredible Rosie. Rosie, thank you so much for being on Ambitious and for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I love any opportunity to have a conversation with you, both privately or, publicly. So thank you for having me.
On the note of privately, I will tell you guys the reason that I'm very excited for today is that I've had the privilege of being able to talk to Rosie privately about what she's going to share today. And you guys obviously know that I'm like a strategy and a data nerd. And so we're also both that way in her respect of what she's going to talk about today. She is that way as well. And so it blew my brain, the level of like comprehensive assessment that she was able to provide in a short amount of time. So I cannot wait to be able to kind of unpack that and dive into all of that today. I would love to just give a little bit of context and a starting point of, obviously today we're going to be talking a lot about leadership and strengths and skill sets for entrepreneurs. And I would love to just have you maybe give a little context as to like, how did that, topic or focus come to be something that you dive into now today?
Oh gosh, okay. I love to tell stories that are way too long, so let me just do my
Same.
best
Yeah, that's
to
okay. That's okay.
synthesize, like, and whenever people ask me, I'm like, "Well, let me take you back to when I was 18 years old."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but yes, I guess to share a little bit about my journey, I went to college to be a high school math teacher. I burnt out just from student teaching, so then I went into becoming an actuary, which people, especially entrepreneurs, there if you've been an entrepreneur your whole life, you don't really know what that is because it really only exists in the corporate world. But imagine like a CPA on steroids. Like it's just
Mm.
super intense math nerd kind of stuff. And I was in consulting, financial consulting in the corporate world for Fortune 500 companies. And then I was burning out too. And I was realizing it's kind of like when something isn't working, your body starts to tell you that message that you're not willing to listen to.
Yeah.
And so I was experiencing depression and just like low energy. Everything just felt like I was trudging through life. And so I discovered coaching and went through 2 years to get my coaching certification and then transitioned within my organization to become a coach. So all of that was great. I felt very aligned in the career that I had chosen. But then I started to realize as I was going through that even though I loved what I was doing, I didn't love where I was doing it.
Mm.
And so I had finally found this alignment in, I like to talk a lot about Ikigai. Are you familiar with that concept?
I have heard of it passingly, but I wouldn't say I've spent a lot of time in it, no.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to
Yeah. So I'm like,
refresh your
now
memory.
now I'm excited. I'm like, "Okay, yes."
Yes. So when I was going through my coaching journey, I learned about this concept of Ikigai, which is a Japanese concept that stands for or means a reason for being. And it's the intersection of four things. So it's what you love, what the world needs, what you can get paid for, and what you're good at. And when you can check all four of those boxes within your career, that is something that gives you a reason for being, right? And so I had finally found a career that checked all four of those boxes, and I thought that that was going to be it. But then I realized there was still this like feeling of that something was off because of the environment that I was doing it in. And right, so in the corporate world, it just got to be like I felt like I wasn't able to use my strengths. I felt like I wasn't shining. I felt like the work that I was doing wasn't valued. Personal development is not valued in the corporate world anywhere near the same way as it is in the entrepreneurial world.
Yeah.
And so I started my coaching business on the side while I was in the corporate world. And what I discovered when I was doing both, which was, I was working 80 to 100 hours a week, it was exhausting. But even when I was like working such long hours, what I found was I was more lit up in what I was doing because I was doing it in an environment where my work was more valued, right? Entrepreneurs just valued personal development work, which is what I
Yeah.
do as a coach. So I felt like my work was more valued. And because of that, I was able to use my strengths more. And I didn't really realize that in the corporate world until I started entertaining something else. That part of why I was struggling in that environment was because the strengths that I have were just kind of going underused and they were tempered. And so after, doing my side hustle of starting my 40-hour a week side hustle of starting my business, I left my corporate job at the end of 2023 and to just focus solely on my business.
Mhm.
And it's been a journey and it was a big transition and I'm still moving I'm almost 2 years into starting my business and I'm still moving through and constantly evolving.
Yeah.
But I found that I am able to shine so much more because I'm touching the four boxes of the Ikigai while I'm also able to work from my strengths and honor the things that I value and kind of cultivate that more. So that's the long-winded way of kind of sharing my journey of one of the many transitions of my life, my most recent, career and even personal development journey over the last 2
Yeah.
years.
Well, they say that, like, entrepreneurship is the most aggressive personal development journey that anyone can go on because I think it brings everything that you're not acknowledging or hiding from or that maybe you just haven't dealt with all to the surface
Yes.
in the moments of each day. I love that you shared that aspect of like environment versus the skills aspect because I'm curious, how did you come to distinguish that it was environment. Because I think so many of us, at least for myself, and I know for some of the peers that I've chatted with, there's been these moments where something doesn't feel like the only word that comes to mind is like aligned. And
Mhm.
something doesn't feel aligned in the way that you're operating or the way that you're working. And so sometimes we have this belief that we just need to push harder. We just need to like work
Mhm.
harder or spend more hours in, or like maybe I should apply myself differently, or maybe I just need to like take a different approach. How did you kind of come to determine that the environment was a big factor in what was kind of leaving you feeling like that lack of fulfillment in a way?
Yeah. So it's interesting. There's a couple of things, but I'll first take it from like the strengths lens. And just for context, like I talk about the concept of working from your strengths, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that.
Mhm.
But one of the ways to know that you're working from your strengths, like your natural talents and abilities, are that you feel energized by what you're doing. It might feel hard, like nobody gets away with not working hard, right? As an entrepreneur, as a high
Mhm.
achieving or high performing leader, hard work is supposed to be hard, but it's not supposed to feel draining or de energizing. If you feel like you're working hard, but it's filling up your tank, you're feeling energized by it, that's typically a sign that you're working from your strengths
Mm.
and also that you're doing it in the right environment. And I'll kind of get to your to parsing out like strengths versus environment. But all of I wanted to at least mention, I think there's so much, especially in at least like American culture, where like hard work is supposed to feel hard. Just push your head down, move
Mhm.
through it, make
Mhm.
it work. And yes, I think if you are high achieving or high performing, like we've all gone through that. And that's essentially what was happening for me in the corporate world. But I started noticing, I was like, when I started to do try things in a different environment, when I was working on the side doing my coaching business, I was like, I'm exhausted, right? Like I was working so much, but
Yeah.
I felt excited about it. I felt energized. I felt like it was like filling up my cup, even if I was tired.
Mm.
And so that's typically, again, a sign that you're working from your strengths and that you're working in the right environment. If you feel like you are constantly drained, de energized, when you're just trudging through it, typically, like I said, it's a sign that you're not working from your strengths or you're not in the right environment or both. And what I will also say, I think for me, that was an aha once I became an entrepreneur was that I was working really hard to change the environment that I was in. And that
Mm.
started to be de energizing. I was in the corporate world. I was very people focused. I loved personal development. And I felt like I was always pushing and pushing and pushing. I was on the executive team and I was pushing the other executives to be people focused. And it started feeling very exhausting again, and not in an energizing way, not like I'm
Yeah.
doing the hard work and it's feeling good.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started entertaining being an entrepreneur that I was like, wow, like this environment feels like, yes, it's hard, but I feel excited about it. And that's when I
Mhm.
realized, like, instead of trying to change and tweak the environment that I was in, that my energy would be better spent changing to a new environment.
Mm.
So I don't, that's not like the clearest, it's very mucky, right? There's not like a clear way of really saying, like, this is the roadmap to do that, but it really is paying attention to your energy. Like hard work is hard, but it shouldn't feel miserable. If it feels
Mm.
miserable, that's a sign that you have to listen to and figure out like what is it and kind of play with that.
Well, I think two things I take from that is, and you mentioned something, it's wild that you said what you said, because I listened to a podcast this morning, it was noting the exact same thing. It was saying there's these two sides that we get of messaging of like purpose or fulfillment. The one side is that classic quote where they say like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life.
Mhm.
And then there's the people who say like, leave your passion as something separate and then you have your work, because if you work in your passion, eventually it all becomes work. And so
Mm,
the thing that I think what ends up happening is we get stuck in this middle of we're trying to figure out, okay, is this my passion, or do I like this, or am I exhausted because I don't resonate with the mission, or is it just because I'm genuinely working a lot of hours, right? And trying to kind of sort it all. But the aspect of environment that I took from that was the fact that you really wanted to have a mission and feel like you're planting seeds toward a mission that was moving in a direction that you actually felt like you had control over, in the sense of
mm,
like the more effort you put in, you could see that turn into something, versus if it's in a larger structure, you only kind of have your bucket where you can influence. Whereas I feel like now, probably with your coaching, it's just infinite influence because of this, right? Your mission kind of gets to be a lot bigger and broader. The strengths you mentioned, obviously, I know is like the heart of a lot of what you do in coaching, in leadership coaching. So you mentioned, strengths are something that you're not going to feel probably exhausted by. What were some things that came up for you or some awarenesses you had that you're like, I feel like I'm not working in my strengths? Like, obviously, one of them was that you felt really tired. Was there anything that kind of, I guess, came up for you almost as like a symptom that made you go, okay, I want to reevaluate here?
Yeah. So a couple of things. And just for context, this is something I rolled out in the corporate world. I know you've taken the assessment, right? But the organization Gallup, they're a large management consulting company. They do a lot of polls. Like a lot of people know Gallup because of their polls, but they created an assessment called Clifton Strengths. It used to be called Strengths Finder. And when I discovered that, we ended up rolling it out at my organization. And that really I really took to that because one of my strengths is to naturally recognize the strengths in others, what makes them unique, what lights them up. That's part of what I do in coaching, right? I think everybody is unique and is special in their own way. And so identifying what that is and working from that has always naturally energized me.
Mm,
And so strengths have become such a core tool to my coaching because one, right, when you take an assessment, it kind of gives you words on a paper and it gives you language for things that you're like, I thought everybody did this, right? I
yeah.
didn't realize this was something only I do.
Yeah.
Or like, yeah, wow, that is me. I never thought about it because this is so natural to how I behave.
Mm,
And so when like I said, I took the assessment, it took me a long time to really understand it. But one of my strengths in this report, which is true about me, it's been true about me my whole life, is I am a person that's very rooted in my values. There are certain things for me that are black and white or right and wrong. And like that's something I naturally do. It's not always a strength. Sometimes that gets in my way, right? Just because I do it naturally doesn't mean it's automatically a good thing.
mm,
But I found that in the organization, my values were essentially getting stepped on. Like
mm,
I felt like I was so people focused and I felt like I was constantly fighting this fight to say, wow, we are promoting these people to be in even more elevated leadership capacities, but they're terrible people leaders and they don't care at all about people, but you're promoting them because you're afraid to lose them. And they're really good at bringing in revenue, but you're going to give them an even bigger team when they're already terrible leaders and their team has a lot of turnover, but you just want to keep them happy. So for
yeah.
me, like some of that stuff was going against my values. And so then that was draining to me because I felt like I was constantly fighting. So it was like noticing that there was really essentially a misalignment between my values and the values of the organization. What they said their values were and what their values actually showed up as were different. And
Yeah.
so that was one. And I would say the other one is like one of my strengths is it's called input in the assessment language. But what it means is I like to collect, archive, aggregate data, information. Like I love to take things in that I think are useful and have utility. And I get energy that this strength gets energy from sharing that information. And
Mm,
I found when I was doing that in the corporate space, it would just fall flat. I'd be like, oh, hey, I read this article and I researched it and I want to implement it. And it'd be like, yeah, that's interesting. And then I'd spend hours like navigating different relationships, trying to get stakeholder buy-in to
mm,
then finally convince them. And then they do it at 10% of what it actually could have been. And
yeah.
so that's where it felt like, gosh, I'm trying so hard to like do these things that I know will help us and move us forward and everybody's on board with. But then it would take the wind out of my sails where like nothing would happen with it. And
Mm,
so that was like my strengths were essentially getting like stunted or stepped on because of the environment. So it's like that constant like the wind was getting taken out of my sail. The wind was
mm.
getting taken out of my sails. I don't know if that's the phrase, but I
Yeah.
think you know what I'm saying.
Well, like, and I kind of for anyone who's curious, and we're obviously dive into it, but the assessment was actually something that Rosie did with me, and the way that if I could like distill it down to simplify it, would be that this is basically, as I see it, almost like the leadership assessment or the CEO assessment, and it could obviously be used in corporate as well, but obviously in the context of business would almost to me be seen as like personality test meets love language. And what I mean by
Mm,
that is like I think personality test in the sense of you really start to understand yourself and how you operate and kind of like the the system that is you. But I think the love language side is something so many of us are, aware of. And as you said, like you start to realize the impact of others with that. And you start to realize, okay, well, what do I need from an environment that I'm in? What do I need from team members that I interact with? And there's like more of that interpersonal side. So it's like understanding you. But then I think the phase two that I took from it was like understanding you in context of others. So
mm.
I'm curious when, you did the assessment, and obviously we can dive into exactly what it is. But when you did the assessment, did you feel like you're like, "Oh, I feel validated," as in like you felt like you saw yourself, or were you like, "Oh, these are not what I thought my results would be." Like was it a surprise to you, or did it feel like you finally got the validation of understanding how you operated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, when I work with clients that are taking it for the first time, it's usually one of the two where they're like shocked and they're like, "Oh," or right, I expected to be this, but it was not that. Or they're like, "Wow, I feel really seen."
Mm,
And for me, when I first saw it, I was shocked and I was like, "What?" Because my results, I expected to be all there, there's 4 different domains, and I expected to have a lot in the relationship building domain. And I did. I had 3 of my top 10 strengths were in the relationship building domain, but I led with strategic thinking and I was like, "I'm a coach. I should be relationship building. Like that should
yeah.
be I should have the most relationship building." My empathy was, you know, number 16 out of 34. I was like, well, I should have high empathy. Again,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
went into a little bit of scarcity, and I always say like it took me an entire year to understand what my number one strength was, which was that input of like I like to aggregate things and then share them. And
Mm,
so it was very much a journey to understand and then embrace my strengths. And that really is the journey of the concept of strengths is like understand what they mean, embrace them and say, yes, this is who I am. And then ultimately learn how to use them intentionally. They're already natural to you. The test
mm,
just helps you identify the things you naturally do think and feel.
mm,
But the goal is to say, now that you know you're already doing these things every day without trying, how do I start to use them intentionally? But you have to
mm.
understand what they are and embrace that that's who you are in order to get to that place. So it took me
Yeah.
about a year of really understanding and embracing. And now I feel like every time I talk about strengths, I like unlock a tiny little nugget. Even with my clients, I've been working with somebody for 6 months and we just like unlocked this new aspect, and it's somebody I've had a relationship with for years, but we unlocked this new aspect of his strengths, and we've been working for 6 months together, right? Like, it just goes so deep, and
Yeah.
that's also what I love about it too, is, like, I'm always learning about my own, and when I work with clients, I've clients I've had for years that were still like, "Wow, I never realized how it shows up in this way, and now let's use that to our
Mm.
advantage," right? So at this point, I don't even remember what your question was, but hopefully I got too excited. So
It's okay, I love
hopefully
it.
I
I'm the
answered
exact same way. I'm the same way. No, but when you did the assessment with me, I will be very honest. I got like the email and it's like, here's your results. And I'm like, amazing. And it felt like so exciting. I'm like, I'm going to have everything that I thought about myself be validated. And I was so wrong. I opened it and I had this aspect of like, same like you. And I was like, this is not good. Cause I thought I'm a coach and I'm supposed to have this avatar of thinking and being and all these are what are supposed to be my dominant. And I remember that you had run the same test for my partner, and his results are what I wanted my results to be. And I was
Mm,
like, no, that's how I'm supposed to be because I'm a coach. And this is how, again, I lead my business with empathy, I lead with values. Right. And so I remember when more of like the strategy side came through as a more dominant in mine initially. I remember saying to him, I felt an insecurity because I thought, oh
mhm,
my gosh, does this mean I'm, cold? Does this mean that I don't actually have a relationship focus? And my mind started to go. And then when you started to really explain, okay, here's the assessment, here's what it means, and here's how you can decipher it, it started to really make sense because you started to say, I bet you're probably the person who does X, Y, and Z. And I was like, yes. And I bet you're the person who in decision probably needs this, this, and this. And I'm like, yes. And then you start to really see outside of just the numbers exactly what it means in day-to-day life or business for you. And so for the person listening, if they're like, I've never heard of Clifton Strengths, what might be like your synopsis of kind of what they could picture or what that experience would look like if they wanted to do this assessment for themselves and kind of learn how to integrate this awareness?
Yeah. Yes, great question. So the assessment, it's something you take one time. So it's not, and I in my corporate life, if you're familiar with the DISC assessment, I also would train and coach on the DISC assessment. And I'm familiar, with Myers Briggs or Enneagram, there's all these different ones. But
Yeah.
typically in business settings, the most common are DISC and Clifton Strengths. And so with Clifton Strengths, it's unlike other assessments where it is something you're meant to only take one time. You would really only retake it if you went through like a big traumatic life event that really like forever changed you, right? If you had a near death experience or you had something like that where you just kind of are have a totally different outlook on life and the way that you show up. So it's something you take one time and it's really intended to uncover like your raw DNA, meaning it's identifying the things you naturally do think and feel the most of and the things you do think and feel the least of. And so, even though we use words like strengths, it's really identifying your talents. The things you do think and feel the most of are identified in the reports, the things you do think and feel sometimes, and then the things you do think and feel not at all. You don't think and feel typically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
um, and the goal is to say, okay, the things I do think and feel all the time, they're always on. Where are they already showing up as strengths? Where am I already using these things to my advantage, right? Like one of your strengths, I was just peeking at them as you were talking, like is achiever, right?
Mm.
That's like achiever is like more is more. I can get a lot done. I get satisfaction from working hard. Typically set the pace. If I'm on a team, I set the pace of work for a team because I like to work fast and I like to work hard. And they derive a sense of satisfaction from that. Right. And so if that's in your top 10, Clifton Strengths, there's 34 themes, right? Your top 10 themes. When you look at your assessment results, it's just telling you the things you do think and feel the most of. You're probably using I know this about you, right? You're using your achiever already as a strength in many ways. But just because it's up high, the things you do think and feel the most of, they're not automatically strengths. There's probably times in your life where your achiever has gotten in your way, where you've burnt out. People that are high achiever are likely to burn out because they're like, well, I can get a lot done. Let me just take on more and more and more, right?
Mhm.
And so what it helps you see what's up high and say, these are the things you're already doing, thinking, and feeling. Let's identify where you're using them today, where you're not using them today, and there's opportunities, or maybe where they're working against you. And we need to figure out how to tweak the way that you're working it, maybe use a different strength to help balance it out better if one is turned on way too high. And so, what's really cool, like I said, you take the assessment one time and the report is really robust. So when you read the report, it says if you're high achiever, for example, the way that your strengths, because there's 34 different strengths that they rank you on, the way that your talents show up, your achiever is going to look very different. I'm high achiever too. It's going to look different from my achiever because you have a different top 10 than I have. So your combination of themes are different than mine. And there's a 1 in 33 million chance that you just have the same top 5 themes out of 34 in the same order as somebody else. So the
Wow.
combinations of I know, like that's
That's
crazy
an
to me.
insane stat. That's
Yes.
an insane I'm just, like, taking that in. That's an insane stat. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And
Okay.
that's what's it's like we're all so unique. It really is like a fingerprint, right? Like we have just we're really unique in the way that our themes show up. And so the report takes that into account. And it's like, here's what achiever means. I gave you the generic definition
Mm.
of achiever, but the report will tell you here's how your achiever likely shows up because you're also high responsibility and high activator, right? And that looks different from me because I'm not high responsibility and high activator.
Mm.
And so, right, and I'm using like jargon right now, but it gives us these like single words to help us understand the essence of that talent that we have. And what's really cool about the report, and this is part of what I love about Clifton Strengths, is You take it one time. The report not only says this is how it shows up for you, it also tells you what your blind spots likely are. Like achiever is prone to
Mhm.
burning out, so is
Mhm.
responsibility. And then it will tell you here's ways that you can start to use it more intentionally, both for yourself and also when working with others, right? Like one of your top strengths is activator. You're
Mhm.
very quick to get started on things.
Yeah.
And you will be a self starter, right? That means like, I have this idea, I'm going to start on it right now.
Yeah.
And but it
Yeah.
also means if you're on a team, you can push the team to get started, right?
Mhm.
And that's really cool, and that's the power of strengths. It's always like how you use it with yourself and how you use it outside of yourself. And there's so many opportunities to say like, wow, I'm really good at getting myself started, but I'm not using it enough with my team to help get them started. So how do I use that strength more? And
Mm.
and so it's very robust, it's very deep, and the more you learn about it, the more that you like dive into strengths. And like you mentioned you were listening to a podcast this morning, right? Like I'm a big podcast listener too, and they have like hundreds of podcasts that talk about strengths, right? Like, so the
Mm.
well just goes very deep. If it's like, I want to learn about how to use Activator to lead my teams better, there's a podcast about that, right? So you
Yeah.
can just listen to 30 minutes on one strength on this specific area. And so that's why I love it. You take it one time, but it's like, it feels so energizing and validating the more you dig into it and understand like, wow, these are my superpowers, and there's so much I'm already doing with them, but there's so
Yeah.
much more I can do with them too. And it's exciting because then it feels good. That's where it like feels energizing to say like, wow, this is me, and I get better results and I feel better when I do these things.
Well, and I think it also feels less overwhelming. Like, I feel like being a business owner or an entrepreneur, when you initially come into it, if you're not aware of an assessment like this, you're like, I just have to be good at everything. I just have to be good at, right? I just have to be a good leader, but I also have to be good at relationships, but I also have to be the social butterfly, but I also am kind of an introvert. And you have all these awarenesses. But I think a lot of the time when business owners go into business and they start as an entrepreneur, they're like, I just have to create all the skills because that's what's required for me to get to the next level. But then kind of based off what you're saying, all of us have, and I love the analogy of the fingerprint because I had no idea it was that micro specific. That's incredible. Because I've done disc assessments and things in the past, but they're a little bit more generalized, I think, much
Mhm.
more than that. And so this really is like the full fingerprint really of you as an entrepreneur and as a CEO. But with that, I think the tricky part in it is like we feel like we need to do all of the things and frankly have strengths in all the areas because like that's what's required for me to grow. And obviously you've worked with a lot of really successful business owners, entrepreneurs, and in corporate. Is it required? Meaning like does the individual themselves really have to have all these skills in all these areas to truly thrive as a business? Because I know when you shared my assessment, I remember I used to consider myself an extrovert, generally speaking. Like I would say I'm pretty social. I wouldn't say that I'm like, closed off by any means, but I definitely recharge on my own. And so
Mm,
that again, thinking of insecurity, when it came through that I was like, okay, like I have social media and I have to go to networking events and I have to go do speaking and things like that. I need to be the social person who works the room.
mm,
But the assessment came back as like, no, like you're not naturally wired to be that person. I thought, "Oh my gosh, like I have to go become this person now." And then I
mm,
remember you sharing, you're like, "No, you're basically the person that once someone starts the convo, then you take it. But you're not the kind of person who goes and starts the conversation." And that landed for me because I thought of all the different situations where that had come up. And I'm like, you know what? She's spot on. As soon as someone intros me to someone, I'm good to go. But I often rarely make the first move. But then it kind of again gives you validation to say this is okay. Like, do you think that when someone does this, your, I guess, recommendation or prescription, if you will, to them is like, is this kind of almost a permission slip to not have to be good at literally everything?
yes. Yes, it's such a good question. And again, as you're talking, I like can't help. I'm like peeking at your strengths as you're talking too.
Yeah.
One of the things your strengths tells me is you don't like small talk, right? You like to
True.
go
Yeah.
deeper and talk. So yes, when somebody starts a conversation with you, you can have small talk, but you really will gravitate toward conversations that just go deeper on topics that you care about. And So then to go back to like the permission slip slide and just the concept of you don't have to like be everything and be good at everything, but as entrepreneurs, you have to figure out everything needs to get done and you have to figure out how
Yeah.
that happens. And so I always say there's like 3 core strategies when it comes to strengths and getting things done. And the first is identifying. So, like I said, the things at the top of your report, if you were to take it, your top dominant strengths, the things you always do, those are always on. Those are the tools. I always say those are the tools in your toolbox that you use to get all of the jobs done that you have to do. So you have a toolbox, you got a hammer, whatever screwdriver in your toolbox, right? Then there's the bottom of your report. Those are the things you don't naturally do, think, or feel. And so let's say, like, right, one of your bottom strengths was woo, which is winning others over. That's the like, I want to like kiss the babies. I want to make friends with everybody in the room.
Yeah.
They're the like, if I go to a networking event and there's 200 people there, I would love to meet all 200 people and talk to them for 5 minutes, right?
Mhm,
Those
mhm,
are people that are high woo. They're the most natural at networking if it's high for them. And so, as an entrepreneur and a business owner, is networking an essential part of what you do? Yes, right?
mhm,
Like it's very rare to not have to network in some capacity as an entrepreneur, right? And so, but the first question that I always say to ask yourself if you have to do something that would typically require a strength that's at the bottom of your report, the first question to ask yourself is it really something I have to do? Right. So let's set the networking example to the side just for now. Sometimes we feel like we're supposed to do something because we see it somebody else doing it that way. Maybe we have like a mentor, right? That's been like, this is really something you need to do to be successful. And so sometimes it's asking yourself, is this something I just think I need to do because I've seen other people do it this way? Or is it something, yes, that I truly need? I would say that's the least common. Usually, if it's like networking, yes, I have to do that, right? But sometimes it really does require you to be honest with yourself. Is this something I actually need to do, or I just think I need to do it? So let's say you've identified, yes, it's something I need to do. Then the second aspect to entertain is, okay, do I have to be the one to do it? Again, setting networking to the side, do I have a team member or somebody else in my life that I can call on to do this thing instead because it's one of their strengths? And so that's like the second question to ask yourself essentially is, can I outsource this in some capacity to
mhm,
somebody whose strength it is? And this is true in business. It's true in, any sort of partnership. With my husband, right? This is very true. Like there are things that are in his top strengths that are low for me,
mm,
and I used to feel guilty about that. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, he likes doing these things. It energizes him to do these things. So, and there's certain things that are high for me that are low for him. And I'm like, it energizes me to be the strategic person. He's not.
yeah.
And so I take on the strategy. He takes on more of the like consistency side of things. And so he's a creature of habit. So I can rely on him to kind of like keep the flow of things moving, and I get to be like the dreamer and the strategy person, right? So it's like, can I outsource it to somebody that's going to be energized by this thing? And so it's going to produce better results and they're going to feel better too getting to do that. Sometimes we don't have that option. In the example of networking, yeah, as a business owner, you have to network. Maybe you have other team members that are networking too, but you still need to network as a business owner.
Mhm,
So it's something I have to do and it has to be me. The third strategy is, how do I do it in a way that feels authentic to me?
mhm.
And so what I say in the example of the toolbox, as somebody that like doesn't know much about tools, I always use this analogy. But let's say, right, at the you look at the bottom of your report and you like yours is woo, right? And that's the most natural at networking. I say, wow, I have a job that calls for, I have a screw that I need to get into, this piece of wood. I don't have a screwdriver. That's the like, that is the tool that this job calls for. And I don't have a screwdriver. And so that's like, I need to get the screw in. I can't borrow the screwdriver for somebody else from somebody else, right? That's the outsourcing. So it has to be me that gets this screw in. Let me look in my toolbox of my top strengths, my dominant strengths, and say, what tool can I use to get the screw in? Maybe it's not the most natural tool for the job, but it still produces the result. And
Mm,
so, right, that's like, wow, well, I have a hammer in my toolbox. I can hammer the screw in. It will still get it done,
Mhm.
And it's going to feel like, from now the lens of Clifton Strengths, it's produced the results, but it's going to feel more energizing and authentic. So
Mm.
it's like, when I need to network, I'm not going to try to network the way that, like, I've worked with so many people who are like, I know I'm supposed to talk to everybody, but then I just feel so drained at the end of the networking event. I never
Yeah.
connect back with anybody.
Yeah.
I never, like, I'm just dead after that. I had this one client I worked with. He was like, yeah, I met with everybody. I exchanged contact information. I never talked to anybody again. But afterwards, I sat at the bar for a drink and I met somebody else that was at the event. We had a great conversation and now we have a wonderful relationship. And I was like, you can network that way. Give yourself
Yeah.
permission to go based on whatever your strengths are. Maybe your strengths might say, don't try to talk to everybody in the room. Make it a goal to introduce yourself to 3 to 5 new people and try to have deeper conversations with them, right?
Mhm.
Or go there and say, I want to walk away with 1 or 2 people that I feel like I actually want to connect with afterwards. And so my
Yeah.
goal is to meet enough people to have 1 or 2 relationships that I could see going somewhere. And
Mm.
so it's like, there's so many things we have to do. It's just, how do I do it in a way that's going to, again, fill my cup and not have me feel like, oh, this was miserable, but I just had to do it, right? So a sign you're working from your strengths is that you're doing the things in a way that feels energizing. A sign you're not working from your strengths, or like working from the bottom of
Mhm.
your report, your lesser things, is it feels like it's draining you. So that's like my very long-winded way of explaining that concept of, like, as an entrepreneur, there are certain things that just have to be you, but you have to honor the way that you do it. The ways,
Mm.
like, there are creative ways to do it in a way that's like makes you feel better, rather than makes you feel like I just trudged and put my head down and
Yeah.
made it through it.
Yeah. I think it's such a permission slip because what I'm taking from that is that it really protects the outcome as the number one thing that you're trying to focus on. So, like, to your point, even with, say, networking, you know that you need to build your network, you know you need to build connections, but it's more about having a creative mind and an open mind as to what that might look like in order to be able to achieve it. And I think that a lot of the time in business, like, to your point, we see the way that other people do it. So, like, I know someone vividly who goes into a room and, like, they don't say it out loud, but they don't pass a person down the street without being like, "Hi, hi, hi." And I'm just like, I'm not wired that way. And so for me, I always wondered, like, aren't you tired? Like, that just seems exhausting for me. But for them, it, like, it just, exactly as you said, it lights them up in a way that I don't personally relate with at all. But it's interesting on the flip side, when we talk strategy or when I dive into data and things, this person's like, I'm mentally tuned out. Like, I can't get there, kind of thing. So it goes to show, I think, as well, that, like, probably, and I would be curious what your thoughts are, probably the most successful businesses are really where the leader or the head of the organization is the person who's the most in tune with what their strengths are. Because I think even for me in growing my business, there was a lot of things that I recognized. Like, I'm not like a systems person, like
Mm.
diving into building and, creating of systems and processes was not something that I would say like I nerd out on. So, like, it was one of the first things I delegated because I recognized that her skill set, she was like lit up by that in a way that I wasn't. And I'm lit up by the creative in a way that she probably isn't when it comes to marketing and social media. So it kind of, again, was like filling each other's quote unquote weaknesses. But, like, for you mentioned team being one of the pieces, right? And being able to delegate it. I guess the curiosity is, when you're thinking about coaching people, do you think about helping them to find people that have what they don't? Should we ever hire someone who's kind of a carbon copy of us? That's the number one thing I hear is, like, I just want like a mini me on the team. And so, in a way, based on what you're saying, I guess I wonder, is it actually a downside to hire someone who is a you, like, to
Mm.
even have that intention within your team?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll answer that, but I also first want to touch on something else you said that I think will flow into that, which is, one of the things people will say when they see their strengths in the context of the report, is they'll say, like, I had this one CEO I worked with and he was like, "Well, of course I'm high competition," is one of the names of the strengths. So you can
Mhm,
imagine
mhm.
what competition means, right? They
Yeah.
want to be the best. And of course I'm high competition. I'm a CEO. I had to be high competition in order to be a CEO. I've coached with many CEOs. They are not all high competition, right? So it's like, there is no perfect set of strengths for any given role. I've worked
Mm.
with, again, when I was an executive within my previous organization, I coach with other executives. I worked with this one woman, had no strategic thinking themes in her top 10 like you and I have a lot of. She had none, but she was a strategic consultant, right? And so I was like, she had all of these like relationship building themes. Empathy was her number one theme. Most people in the business world, in the corporate world, are low empathy, and it was her number
Mm.
one. And I was like, how are you? And she was amazing at her strategic role. And I was like, how are you so good at strategy? You have none of these themes and you are like
Yeah.
high in all of these people focused
Yeah.
themes. And she's like, Rosie, it's so easy. The first thing that I go do when I'm going to build the strategy for a client, my first thought is, what would I want if I was in their shoes? And that's how I build a strategy.
Mm.
And so all of that to say is like, there's no perfect set of themes for any job, right? It's all about how you use them. And so people will look at the report and say, well, of course I am this way because of my job. And it's like, no, you use your strengths in this way for that job. There are
Mm.
other people who are successful at being a CEO that have no competition, that are high empathy, that are low empathy, that are high, like their combinations. I've never worked with the C suite that have had like a consistent pattern of themes. It's so that
Mm.
goes back to your comment of like the best leaders are the ones that, and there's statistics around this, but the best leaders are the ones that know what their strengths are and know how to use them intentionally to get what they need to get done.
Mm.
And as a statistics person, like the people that work from their strengths every day are 9% more productive, and teams that work from their strengths every day are 13% more productive,
Wow.
right? Which kind of goes back to like your question around outsourcing, right? When you have people that, and it's not, now I'll kind of transition to your question, having like I get this question all of the time. Well, like, should I have a team that's balanced, right? If I'm high in this, do I get, and
Yes.
low in that, do I have
Yeah.
somebody that's my opposite? There's the all of the research, and that's what I love about Gallup is they are such a research-based organization. All of their research shows that the highest performing teams are not the most well balanced from a Clifton Strengths perspective. They are teams that have visibility to each other's strengths and know how to use them intentionally.
Mm.
So there's no perfect combination on a team. I always say if you have a well balanced team, that's like the cherry on top. Like it's a nice to have, it's not a
Yeah.
must have to
Yeah.
get results. And so to your hiring question, and I get this all the time. They're like, should I have somebody take the assessment before I hire them? And
Yes. Yeah.
the answer is yes and no. Think of the assessment as a data point to inform your questions. So let's say you need to hire an integrator, somebody in an integration capacity for a role. You're going to look, there's certain strengths that are just naturally integrating. They're called the executing themes. So there's strengths that are like the get it done. Somebody that's high in executing is like, my first thought is like, what needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so they're the most natural at integration. So let's say you have somebody take the assessment, they are not high in the integrating themes. Does that mean automatically you don't hire them? No. What it means is you ask that person questions about how they get things done, right?
Right.
The things that are core to integration. Going back to that one executive example, if I just looked at her report and she had no strategic thinking themes in her top 10 and I was hiring her for a strategic role,
Yeah.
right? I would be like, if I just looked at a report, right, I'd
Yeah.
say absolutely not, but I would be missing out because I would be missing out on the opportunity to see what it was like for somebody to thrive when their strengths in a role that would tell me on paper that their strengths might not be a fit. So
Mm.
it's all in how you use them. And so it's,
That's a
yeah.
really, like, vivid point for me because to me, I was looking to hire for someone else's team. We were helping with hiring of a sales team. And I remember
Mm.
we had brought in an outside sales specific consultant and they were in the conversation with us and they said like you do the disc assessment and they if they do not have a high this and a low this, you do not hire them.
High
And
D, low C. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and so we same thing, did the hiring process, included in the hiring process was the disc assessment, and the people, their results came through, and they were like, "No, no, no, this is the clear, obvious person." And I think about in that, how many also ways we cope with things and we create our own pathways to get the outcome done. Like I'm thinking even to could be for sales, could be for networking. You may know that you don't naturally like networking, but you even on your own without this awareness of the assessment have already created some kind of tool that allows you to maintain the outcome. And so I love that you mentioned that of like the hiring process because I've often wondered that, which is we know that these assessments are so accurate in the sense of the fact that they are a good synopsis of who we are. But then, yeah, exactly to your point of like, yes, you use it, but no, in a way, that's exactly how I'm feeling about it, which is it brings up a lot of clarity of the assessment of the individual. But then the question really becomes how much weight do you put in it? And also the context of what does it mean within their role? Or is it possible that they already have or have created new pathways to maintain the outcome, even though it's not their natural strength?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And yes, there's two things about what you said because at my previous organization, before we rolled out Clifton Strengths, we would use DISC as a hiring tool as well.
Mhm.
And then we found out that's actually illegal. So
Oh,
just be mindful that
okay.
what's illegal is that you cannot hire somebody or like you cannot pass on a candidate or choose not to hire somebody solely based on their assessment results.
Okay.
Now, right, like for smaller businesses, nobody's like auditing that, but just to be mindful
Yeah.
and illegal or not, and illegals, I'm sure there's a more accurate term for that. But what is true is like, yes, any assessment should be a data point. I am sure that like with a salesperson, high D, high I. That's like the most natural
Yeah.
at sales. From a Clifton Strengths perspective, the most natural at sales are people that are high woo, right? Love to network, but higher in influencing themes. The
Yeah.
themes that are like they love to put themselves out there. They love to elevate things, ideas, people. And so those are the most if you were to slide somebody's strengths in front of me and say based on strengths alone, which person should I hire to be a salesperson? I could tell you it's if they're high in influencing.
Mm.
Those themes will tell me that it comes the most natural to them. Same thing with disc. If you slid it in front of me, I would say
Mhm.
hire the high D, high I.
Mhm.
But people are so much more complicated than what's on a piece of paper. And
Yeah.
to like your point and what we're talked about, it's all about how you use them.
Mm.
And so using strengths or something like DISC, they should be a tool to inform the questions that you ask.
Mm.
So if you're trying to hire a salesperson and influencing is their lowest domain, you want to understand how they network. You want to understand how they build relationships. The influencing themes I say go wide with people, and that's the nature of sales is you have to go wide with people. Maybe they have themes that are blue, which is relationship building. They like to go deep with people. So
Mm.
maybe they have built a sales process and networked in a way that has allowed them to build like long standing relationships, and that's how they network and that's how they sell, and they've had a lot of success doing that.
Mm.
So it's all like the assessment should always be a data point to inform where to dig deeper. But yes, you should never hire based purely on an assessment because you'll just be passing on talent, and you're also going to overvalue the talents that align with what you think they should be. Right?
Mm.
Like the assessment might tell you what comes naturally to somebody, or disc is like will tell you their communication style, but there are high D, high I's that are abrasive, right? That
Yeah.
are like way too intense, that don't know how to match the energy. If they're a high D, high I, and they're like low empathy, they might just barge through with
Mm.
with a potential client, right? And not be a good listener, or like maybe lean into high pressure sales that's going to damage relationships and things like that. So it's all about like what's on paper is never going to tell the full story. And just because you're high in things that are natural for that role doesn't automatically mean you'll thrive with them.
Mm. And I think that, like, for most people listening to that, I feel like there's one part of that which can almost feel disappointing because I think so much of marketing and on online social, content wherever you get it is this belief that there's like this high performer, ambitious individual, and this is how they work. And it's like they operate this way, they work this way, they have this type of team. Like it almost feels like this like pre-made prescription of success. And really what you're saying is, and obviously to your point, you've worked with a lot of different individuals at different levels of their career and CEOs of businesses who all have different assessments. So I think that that also naturally, in you saying that, breaks this, you know, belief and perspective that we've been sold, which is like, I just have to figure out how to be X. And even in going into today, I wondered, which I'm very glad now that I didn't do. People have asked me, we'd had a networking dinner recently, and someone said, I just want to understand how you think, how I operate, how
Mm.
I go about things so that they could start to embody that too. And really what you're
Yeah.
saying is like, regardless of what's on, your assessment or my assessment, it's kind of irrelevant because that's our operating system. And the only route to success in business, life, whatever it may be, or as you mentioned earlier, relationships, is really only understanding your specific assessment. Because if you try to take, well, this is what Steve Jobs' assessment was, or this is what Jeff Bezos' assessment was, that's not necessarily any kind of blueprint as to how you would be successful. I would probably hazard to guess it would be the harder way to become successful because you're really trying to fit what might be your quote unquote weakness and make that your top strength and the way that you would build your company.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. What you said was beautiful, and I don't even know what I could add to it because it was perfectly articulated. And yes, it is like we're all looking for an easy button. We're all looking for a blueprint.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed since becoming an entrepreneur is I see like mentors out there or coaches out there where people are like, wow, I see what they've achieved and I want to follow their roadmap to get there.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're doing themselves a disservice by thinking that way, and their mentor is also doing them a disservice if they are saying this is the only way,
Yeah.
right? There are people that are like, and I've seen that. I've coached with people who are like, "My mentor says I need to meet 100 people at the networking event." I'm
Mm.
like, "Well, is that producing results for you? Is that
Yeah.
working for you? Are you enjoying that?" Like, there are other ways to accomplish it. And so, like, yes, the best mentors and coaches are ones that know how to push people, like know how to push people to find their roadmap and their own answers. Everybody wants an easy button and they think the easy button is a copy paste. I have seen your
Mm.
success. I want to do it your way. I love
Mm.
what you've built and created. How do I just copy paste that? And they think that that's the easy button. But it's not, right? Like the copy paste, it really doesn't work. It doesn't work for anybody.
Mm.
It's the you've achieved what you've achieved by doing it your way,
Right.
right? Like, doesn't mean that you haven't tried to do it other people's way, but essentially, the people that have made it to where they've made it are typically because they've embraced what's natural, what their natural, whether they've consciously done it or not,
Mhm.
they've done it their way.
Yeah.
And so trying to copy paste doesn't work. The true easy button, if there was one, is focusing on doing it your way. I know the results that I want to create. How do I create it in a way that's energizing to me, that feels authentic to me? And again, it's not just like a rah type of like, oh, wouldn't it be so nice if we all got to work from our strengths? Like, you're more like the research that Gallup has done is when you work from your strengths, you're more productive, you are 3 times more likely to report having a high quality of life and 6 times more likely to be
Wow.
engaged in your work. And so it's not just like you're 10%, almost 10% more productive, 3 times more likely to have a high quality of life, and 6 times more likely to be engaged in your work. So, like, there's all of this data that says it's not just a nice to have to work from your strengths. It actually produces better results, both in your work and in your life as a whole. But it's hard. Like, that is the hard work. The hard work is not, I'm going to copy what Kate does and just do the same thing.
Mm.
That's like trying to take the easy route, is to copy somebody else and to focus on what's outside of you. The hard work is to say, who am I? What are my values? What are my strengths? What are the things that are important to me? And how do I use those to get at the results that I'm looking for?
Mm.
That is the hard part. That's the hard work that's like worth doing and feels energizing. But it really requires you to face things inside of yourself and let go of things that maybe you thought you should be, or things that you thought
Yeah.
you wanted.
Yeah.
Like, that's hard work, but it's worth work doing. Like, it's, I don't know how to describe it. Like, we think the easy way is to copy somebody else, but really the easy way is doing it your own way, but it's hard, and it's like easy and hard
I
at
think
the
it's
same
I think
time.
it's easy in the short term. I think it's very hard in the long term. Like,
Yeah.
I think in the short term, we think, okay, we're going to take this person and fit ourselves within that model. But I think exactly to your point, when you think about overall success, and it also could be overall fulfillment. Oftentimes we're not fulfilled in what we're doing though, because we're finding like this doesn't feel like it fits me. Like this feels like I'm wearing someone else's clothes. This does not necessarily feel like it aligns with what I'm trying to do. And I asked that question because I think so many of us read books, listen to podcasts being like, give me the path to success. Like, give me the millionaire routine, and I'm going to take that, embody it, and that's what I'm going to do. And then that's going to lead me to get the same result. And I love what you said, because I think everyone that I know as entrepreneurs, and I'm sure for yourself as well, like when you start to really get to know them on a deep level, you realize how truly different all of us are. Like you've got the person who, as I said, is like that networking butterfly who's just like all over the room and they have a 7-figure business. Then you go to the person next to them. And exactly as you said, they go with a few people, but a lot deeper, and they create a lot more long-term connections from that, less wide, more deep. And that's their approach. And I think once you start to see all these different types of avatars and then all recognizing that they're still very successful, just all in different ways, it becomes this like permission slip. And I found that the assessment for me was also like the cherry on top of that. I feel like I had been kind of navigating my own way, but maybe didn't have clarity to put a name to it, to put a number to it, to kind of explain it. We all have this, I think, like intuition in a way that tells us what feels right for us or what doesn't. But I think what the assessment and your overview of it did is it really started to say, hey, like this is a visual of how you think and operate.
Mhm.
And again, at first, the disconnect was that I thought it was wrong based off what society had told me, or again, social media or mentors, as you said, and what I was told was the way to go. But even to your earlier point, when you were mentioning sales and how sales are usually high woo, yet I'm low woo and I was a high ticket phone closer. So when you think
Mm.
about that exact example for me, when you said that, I was like, ding, ding, ding. This is literally the exact point you're making. I was still able to do really well as a sales closer, but I leveraged my social work skills of interpersonal connections and, as you mentioned earlier, going deep with people. That's actually how I closed people. I didn't use the
Yeah.
push or, the super wide networking or any of that. I went super deep with people, and that was the thing that allowed them to close. So, I'm curious because you mentioned, you know, you have your strengths and then you have again like your weaknesses in the different levels of how much you integrate them. We know that there's no common denominator necessarily, that all CEOs have X quality, but I'm curious if you see a pattern of how they approach overcoming it. Meaning they get their assessment, they take it, they have this awareness, they go, okay, this is who I am. When they're in coaching with you, the people that are the most successful to lean into their strengths or to find new pathways to tap into still getting outcomes with their weaknesses,
Mhm.
is there a certain perspective they have? Is there a certain maybe way they operate or a way that they look at the coaching that you think allows them to get those great outcomes? Because I think there's two people. There's the person who sees that I have a weakness and they think, okay, well, this is just who I am. So I have to hire out the rest and I'm not going to touch it. And then obviously, I know a lot of the work that you do is not just the assessment, but it's also like, how do we make sure this doesn't feel like a scarlet letter? And instead, it's like, we're going to actually use this to help us develop you, not to say this is where you're capped. So, like, where is that distinction, do you think, of what someone needs to keep in mind or what they might need to prepare themselves for to really lean into like better understanding what their approach is and also how they can grow within that?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And yes, I love that you said the scarlet letter thing, because it's like the goal is not to put you in a box,
Yeah.
right? The goal is not to say, okay, this is who you are. Like you'll never be high woo. So, sorry, you're screwed when it comes to networking.
Yeah.
Now, what I will say is you will never be high woo. That doesn't mean like the strengths don't change order. If you take this assessment again in a couple years, your results will generally stay the same. Like your top 10 to 15 might move. Maybe your achiever is number, I don't remember what it is, but let's say it's number 2
Hmm.
and it moves to number 7. Like that's not statistically significant from a Clifton Strengths perspective. So first to keep in mind is yes, if I'm working with an executive there and let's say they're low woo, they're like, how do I get that higher? Right. So
Mm.
the goal is not to change the order. And the first thing is just embracing like, this is what it is. The assessment said you were answering questions and you answered the most questions about what you do think and feel that's high in your report, and the least questions that tell me you don't do think or feel these things at the bottom. So the first is just like embracing, okay, I've identified the things I do think and feel the most and least of. Then it's saying, what things today are getting in my way? So it's almost like identifying goals and roadblocks.
Mm.
So there's an executive that I'm working with right now, and I mostly work with women, but it's like, with if I'm working with the right man, then it works well. It always has to be a man that like knows how to
Same.
be
Yeah.
vulnerable, which is hard to find.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm working with this executive right now. He's like an SVP, so he's not a CEO, but he's at a large, Fortune 500 company, and he is struggling with like getting to sort of the next level, and he's looking at some of the other executives that are ahead of him around him that are higher woo or higher in some of these other themes where he's like, I don't know how to be like that.
Mm.
And he's been working like he keeps pushing me to say, well, I just need to find like, how do I just do what they're doing? And so when I'm working with executives, whether it's a CEO or an executive in a large organization, like a CEO of a business that they run or in a large organization, it's essentially the same to say, to really push them to embrace what's on the report and understand if they have a goal for where they want to go, understand what's getting in their way. And typically, what's getting in their way is either some of their strengths are turned on too high. They're like overusing a strength.
Mm.
They're like living in their achiever energy. And they have some other strengths in their top 10 they're just not touching at all.
Mm.
So sometimes it's like, okay, like, yes, I know you're kind of like, there's like what the idiom of like, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail or
Yeah.
whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes I'll coach with CEOs that like they're like, let me use my achiever for everything, right? And
Mm.
that's just like what I do. And so it's like, where is that getting in your way? And how do we like create balance to pull in some of your other things that are high for you that are being underused right now?
Mm.
And it will not only feel more energizing, but it will produce better results because you're not just a hammer trying to use that tool for every job. Sometimes this is more true in the corporate world than I see in the entrepreneurial world. But sometimes I'll see that leaders, especially, this is especially more true of men, but it happens with women as well, that might be like low empathy.
Mm.
And so if you're somebody that's low in the Clifton Strengths theme empathy, it doesn't mean, I would say, it doesn't mean you're a sociopath, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're not an empathetic person.
Yeah.
It just means in that example that I gave of the other executive, the woman that was high empathy, it means if it's low, your first thought is not, what does that other person want? Right? That's just not what might that other person be feeling? It doesn't mean you don't consider their feelings. It means it's typically not a data point that you're using when you're making decisions.
Mm.
And so if you're lower empathy, for example, and you're an executive, which is common, then you might be missing feelings as a data point to making decisions.
Mm.
And so a lot of times we'll also look at what's low, and is what's low getting in your way? Just because it's at the bottom of your report, it tells me that's something you don't do, think, and feel naturally. It might be getting in your way. It might not, right? What's low on your report is like, if you're low woo, but you know how to network, great. It's not getting in your way. You don't need to change anything. If you're low empathy and yeah, you're just barging through and you're not listening to what people need and you're just pushing through on your strategy and you've got blinders on and you don't realize that people need to be a part of your process, then yeah, that's now we have to figure out, how do you collect the data point of emotions of others in order
Mm.
to make a more holistic decision. And so it's really like, if I'm working with a CEO of a business, a CEO of or an executive within a corporate company, it's really helping them understand, what are your goals today and what are the things that are getting in your way? And now, how do we identify what strengths, and how do we look at your report to identify what's up high that is currently hurting you, and how do we use it in a different way? And what's down low that's currently hurting you and use it in a different way? And that's for the roadblocks. And then for the goals, it's like, wow, I hear how you're using these things to achieve success, but I also think you're underusing your, like, one of my clients, she's has the strength of like significance, and she was feeling like her work wasn't making as big of an impact as she wanted, and that's what's really important to people that are high in this theme. And so it's kind of like we unlocked this aspect of like, wow, yeah, like you're a CEO of a business, but you don't feel like you're getting enough like recognition. You don't feel like you're getting the feedback in the world that you exist in,
Yeah.
that what you're doing matters. So how do we do more of that, right? How do we And so it's also identifying what strengths are being underused that would get lit up if we turned the strategy on in a different way.
Mm.
So there's so many different buckets to choose from, but it's essentially helping them understand how what's up high is serving them and not serving them, and how what's down low is serving them and not serving them
Mm.
in light of their goals and their obstacles.
Yeah. Well, I thought even when you shared that with me for the achiever bucket, like, and you were saying, yeah, you're probably have been or pretty prone to burnout. And I remember being like, how does she how does she know that? How does she know? Because I always, with like anyone who knows me, it's always like this running joke because I never do anything just to do it. Like it's always this like I'm deciding that I want to run today and then I'm signing up for a 10K. And so there's never anything in between. And so I've always thought, okay, well, a concern I guess of mine previously had been if I tried to dull that, will I dull what made me successful? Meaning
Mm,
like if, achievement is a core factor that was the reason we've generated all these outcomes, I became super nervous to tap into anything else because I'm like, this is the thing that made me successful. But obviously, as you said, it comes with a list of all these other symptoms that come up in the business or in your life because something might be on overdrive when it's not really a matter of turning it off. It's just more a matter of balancing it and getting it back into harmony with the others. So I love that. And it resonated a lot for me when you shared that for my results. You mentioned you work with a lot of women. And I'm curious, as I know, obviously, many who listen to this podcast are all women and female entrepreneurs. Do you feel that, men, women, is there a distinction in some category within this of what you see as trends amongst women that maybe are different than men? Or do you feel like this might be a category where you're like, there really isn't any influence on that here?
yeah. I would say, and now as you say that, I'm like, gosh, I have to go back. I have to look at the data, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
I think they publish, and I will have to look because now you've piqued my curiosity. I think that they've published data on gender, but now I need to check.
Mm.
I will say that from like a strengths perspective, I don't tend to notice, like, there might be a pattern where I see in the corporate world people tend to be lower empathy versus if I've worked with somebody in social work,
Mhm.
or right, somebody maybe in healthcare like a nurse, they tend to be higher empathy, right? Like, and so there are some themes that I see if I work with integrators. I tend to see them having a certain sets of like executing themes. Like, so there are themes like that I see around roles, and I don't think it's because that's like the perfect combination for that role. It's just like they are able to use those themes, are more natural for that role, so
Mm.
that's what they might gravitate toward. But on the so like I see patterns on the role side, and even like in certain like business or industries, I see less patterns from a strengths perspective on the gender side, where I see gender like kind of having somewhat of a distinction really is in how they use them. And I thought about this when you were talking about like DISC for salespeople,
Mhm.
which is like a high D, high I, which is like typically the most like natural at sales from a communication styles. And right, high D is like dominant, right? Like they're just intense. They'll
Mhm.
typically like say the intense thing. They were like have intense. I always know high Ds are so easy to spot. They usually have like intense eye
The eye
contact.
contact always gives it
Yes.
away.
Yes. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're piercing into my soul.
Yeah.
As a low D, right? I'm always like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and right, and high I is, like, very social, right?
Yeah.
They're,
Yeah.
like, it stands for influencing, they're very social.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense, right, that those are like, more natural at sales, but it's also more of a masculine sales style. Like
Mm,
high D is more masculine, that like directness, like right, however we want to define masculine, like that intensity. And so, like, the same thing is true. Like, if a woman doesn't have a high D, high I, her sales style might be more feminine, for
mm,
example. And so she might build deeper relationships. She might show up for that. What if she's a high SC, right? Like, she might build those deeper relationships and also be somebody that's really good at following through with their clients,
yeah.
right? Or with their prospects. And so that's on the disc side. But same thing on the Clifton Strength side. I almost feel like if a woman is in some sort of an executive role, whether that's for her own business or in a corporate business, from a strengths perspective, and I'm like processing this question as I'm answering it because it's like I feel like I'm like, oh my gosh, you've like unlocked this part of my brain that I need to like dig into more. But I will say, like, from a strengths perspective, it's almost like there's women that are in two different buckets with strengths. So I really don't notice consistent themes between men and women as far as like combinations of what I see.
Mm,
But for women, a lot of times there's like I see them thriving in using their strengths when they're embracing their own unique style. I see them struggling with their strengths when they feel like they have to do it from a masculine perspective, right?
mm,
When they do have to, like, well, I am going to get the most results by going toe to toe with these
yeah.
men, by showing up in the way that, like, if I'm in a male dominated industry, which many women are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Most industries are
Yeah.
male
Yeah.
dominated. Right? Like I have to show up in a certain way. So my achiever might be matching the way that I see other male executives
Mm,
showing up and using their achiever
mm,
versus as a woman, like for me, and that is a lot of how I'll use myself as an example. My achiever has shown up as like, well, we're in a world that is like, if it's not tangible and doesn't have results that you can touch, it's not as valuable, right? The
mm,
squishy stuff, the soft
yep,
skills, behavioral skills, personal development, like, that's a nice to have.
mm,
But like the tangible things are more valued. So I will gravitate toward using my achiever from a more masculine way of like, I'm producing results, right? Like
yep,
I'm getting it done. And it's still a part of my own journey to balance sort of the more like feminine approach to achiever, which is like, okay, like what does it mean to achieve in the context of being a wife and a mom? Or what does it mean to achieve in the context of like showing up as my authentic self and doing things that
yeah,
energize me? So, like, the more like feminine approach to strengths is like, I don't have to do it the way it's been modeled for me because typically it will have been modeled for me by other men. And it's
mm,
like, how do I embrace my strengths in a way that are unique to me? And I think so that's when women thrive the most. And I think that they do that in a much more like nuanced and like successful, authentic way than men do. Cause men is like, yeah, I'm just going to copy and paste
yes,
the way I
yeah,
see it done.
yeah,
Women are like, the journey is like, how do I do it in a way that's like me and redefine things
mm,
is really hard to do as, as it is for most women. It's like, we're just kind of like having to create our own mold as we
yeah,
go,
yeah.
but it's extremely powerful.
Yeah, it's such a good sentiment because I think many women and again, including myself, I think that there's been these moments where, even as you mentioned sales, like you think of the bro sales is how I might put it. Like the bro sales approach that is a little bit more aggressive and pushy and a lot of eye contact and more, aggressive and things like that. That is something that a lot of us see. And I remember even when I went into sales, I thought, okay, well, like maybe that's just who I have to be in order to be successful. But then I very quickly realized that like I just was not wired that way. Like it made me even now intense eye contact depending on who the person is makes me uncomfortable. So to think about I guess having to step into that exactly as you said, I even with the social work piece that I mentioned earlier, that was like my way of saying, okay, how do we get the outcome but change the path? And that was really when it's okay. Well, I know I can talk to people and get them to open up, but I can't do it in that way, which was like the bro way. But I can try this over here that I do know. And as to your point, alignment, it feels good. Like I feel
Mhm.
good about it. It doesn't feel slimy or pressure. And the crazy part was it got the same outcome. So then it was like, okay, great, we're on to something here. And I think, you know, when kind of even to what you've mentioned today, the biggest thing that I take from it, and I think that it's something that very few people talk about, but I think what you've done today is you've number one noted the fact that really all success, entrepreneur, corporate, doesn't matter, is going to come from you actually understanding yourself. And obviously we know there's a personal development side to that. There's obviously a strategy side to that, understanding how you're wired and how you operate. I think the second piece of that is like once you say, okay, great, like I am different and I'm not using that to be something that's my disadvantage, but it's actually like where I can find all my success. I think that becomes very empowering. And I think the second piece is then, okay, great. Well, if we have this awareness of what our strengths are, what do we want to do about it? And I think for the person listening, and even for myself, when you shared it with me, the question became, okay, well, where are the areas that I've been ignoring? Meaning, like to your point, even earlier, like I definitely, if someone said, hey, Kate, we're going to a 300-person networking event, I'd be like, I'm sick, I can't go. Like I would I mean, it's not the first place that I would
Yeah.
be. But I think it's when you have, even coaching like you provided today or like you do with clients and someone dives into this work, what it's doing is it's bridging the gap. It's saying you're not wired this way naturally, yes, but the outcomes have to happen. And so with this piece in the middle, we can bridge that gap, meaning you can still be who you are and still get the outcomes that you need for your life or for your business. And I think which was, for me, and I think for the person listening is always a great permission slip is to recognize that there really isn't one way. Like this is, and I know so many people talk about that to be like, there's not one way to be successful, but I think there's so much noise that tells us that that's the case in every bucket, not even business. It could be health, relationships, whatever it might be, parenting, right? Like this is the way you're supposed to do it. And I think this today also gave a permission slip to say that there really isn't one track to success. And on one hand, that's very scary because it means that, like you said earlier, you really have to recognize this is a personal journey. But I would actually say it's so much more empowering because it means you get to do it your way and stop spending the next like 5 to 10 years trying to fit into the box of what someone else said is the thing that's going to help you to scale. So it's just, yeah, there's a lot. I feel like there's so much to dive into. I feel like, as you said, it could be its own podcast, just talking about all the different ones.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's so true, and truly, I could talk for hours and hours just on one person's strengths and still have more to say. It just that's why I have clients that I've worked with for years
Yeah.
that we're still uncovering, nuances of how it shows up, and as you were talking, I'm gonna butcher this quote, but it made me think of one of my favorite quotes in what you just said, which is, and I'm gonna get this like 50% accuracy, but it's like an Emerson quote that's like, the greatest challenge is to be yourself in a world that's constantly trying to make you be somebody else,
Mm,
right? And that's so true. Like we are born with certain identities and we're told this is what a woman's supposed to look like and be like, this is
mm,
what a business owner is supposed to look like and be like, and it truly is like one of life's greatest challenges to say, like, well, what do I want to look like regardless of whatever messages I'm getting outside of myself?
mm.
What is it that lights me up and that is unique to who I am, and that is the greatest gift that I can give to the world. But it is like very challenging work, but it's also so validating because when you try to fit yourself into a mold or a box that doesn't fit you, that's when you wake up after 5 to 10 years and you're like, what am I
Yeah.
doing? Right? I feel empty. I feel like I've done all of these things. And for what? I don't feel any closer to whatever it is that I was trying to
Yeah.
accomplish.
Yeah. So much more fulfilling at the end of it. And if okay, I know obviously as you said today is like I feel and even obviously we've had private calls together. I feel like this is the scratching of the surface. There's like so much. Number one, I just want to say for anyone listening, once you see this assessment, you're going to be like, "Oh," because it's so comprehensive. I would argue as she said, you could probably spend like at least a good 6 months on this and then start to really grasp all the potential that's under in you and unleashed possible within you. But if someone wants to like they're like, "Okay, I want to know as a CEO to grow my business, to scale my business, I am like mentally invested. I want to know what these strengths are." What does that look like? Like just if you can give someone a synopsis of if they want to kind of reach out and connect more, what would that look like to kind of start this journey of getting that clarity of themselves?
Yeah. So just really the best place to start is just by taking the assessment. And that's something if somebody was interested, it's on my website. You can order it.
Okay.
So if you go to rosienoel.com, you can order the assessment there. And that's really the best starting point. It can sometimes be overwhelming when you get
It
the
is.
assessment and you read
It
the
is.
results. Yes.
I
And so that's typically,
personally, just as a sec I little side note, I don't personally think anyone should read these results on their own because I think I will just say when I got that email and I hadn't chatted with you yet, and you're like, "Don't worry about the assessment. I'll see you on the call." I got them by myself like 11 o'clock at night, and I was like, and I remember just there's so much that you could take from it. Then when you went through it, the color that it gave to it was something that I never took on my own. So my little 2
yeah.
cents too would be that if you guys are going to want it to take the assessment, that is great. But I also do think getting your assessment of it is crucial because it really adds, it's like looking at your blood work. It's like you see
Yeah.
that, and then versus what a doctor says of what it means for you is very different.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It's like if it's something that's interesting to you, you take the assessment, and then yes, at that point, also on my website, there's a contact form to reach out to me about going through whether it's coaching together on a single session or if it's something that people would want to coach together on a more ongoing basis. But at a minimum, yes, it's like I can sit down with people just for a single session and give them enough to be dangerous with
Mhm.
on the
Mhm.
assessment to understand not only what it means, but what it means for them and how they can use it intentionally.
Mhm.
And so that's usually the like, if strengths is interesting to you, just to and I always say, start with know thyself of like, take the assessment. I can give you then a breakdown, like a strengths intensive essentially for an hour to help you understand it.
Mhm.
And then, right, because there will be people that are like, well, I want to understand my teams too. But you have to start with understanding your own strengths before you can start to say, oh, well, now I need to, like, sometimes people want to jump to say, hey, Rosie, can you sit down with my team and
Mhm.
go through this together? But if
Mhm.
you're a business owner or a CEO, you need to understand your own strengths first. And so that's the most natural and best place to start. And then from there, there's, so much more that you can unlock. But the best starting place from if strengths is interesting to you and you want to understand them more, where they're getting in your way, where you can use them more intentionally, it's taking the assessment. And then, yes, just having at least like one session with me to go through it. That gives you enough to be dangerous with.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot, I will say, that can come to clarity within, like, an hour. So if you guys are, listening today and you're like, "Okay, like, I wanna know what my blueprint is," again, kind of not necessarily the blueprint of what was told to me to be the way, I really, really recommend, number 1, do the assessment. You will not be sorry. It's something that's gonna give you more clarity than any other test you've probably done. And second, I think the other piece is, as I said, like, it's one thing to get the testing done. It's second to have like someone like Rosie who is an expert who can go through and say, here's what this means for you. And, obviously, Rosie, you work with lots of CEOs day in, day out. And this is something that I feel like a lot of high level position people are investing in because it's not just like I'm thinking of someone who invests, even for me, in business strategy. That's one thing, but how you approach it is really this test, which is like I can give you the same strategy as the person next to you, but how it fits for you is influential based off these results.
Yes. Yeah, it gives a very holistic approach
Yeah.
to say, yes, what is your goal and how do we use your strengths as a roadmap to get you toward that goal?
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. So we will CC all of that in the show notes or the description below. So if you guys want to go check any of that out for yourselves, I'll have all the links there for you. Rosie, thank you so much for coming on today. This was so good. I definitely could have gone for 3 hours. I'm like, I have so many
Same,
more
yeah.
questions.
I'm
So
like, wow, time has flown. My
flown,
non-existent watch. Time has flown.
flown.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so, so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk with you. And yes, I look forward to hopefully us even privately just talking more on your strengths because
Yeah.
even the more I learn about you, I'm like, ooh, my strength. One of my strengths is to love other people's strengths. And so, yes, the
Yeah.
more I talk with people, I'm like, there's so much more I want to learn about you. And
There's
yes,
so
but
much.
thank you. This was great.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And honestly, I will say, guys, like as I said, I've got the assessment myself and we've had conversations together and there's just so much to unpack. So if you're feeling that kind of spark come up in you, take a minute right now and just head over there and just check out at a minimum the actual assessment itself. You will not be sorry. And with that, obviously, you talk a lot more about this even on other podcasts I've seen you on and all of that. So if you guys also want to binge Rosie and seeing her talk about this, there's lots there for you as well. But all of that being said, we'll see you on the next episode. And as always, stay ambitious.